Hey there, this is David Drury, and you're listening to Not That Kind of Christian, where we take on tough topics with heart, humor, and hope. And of course, we always try to make sense of faith in everyday life. So today we're reflecting on what I guess we could just call TikTok Christianity and other social media driven displays of our faith. Usually when people talk about this, they focus on maybe 60-second deconstruction videos. Have you seen those? Or the aesthetic Christian girl autumn videos or AI generated versions of Bible characters giving you like life advice, which is totally interesting, but also super creepy. Make it feel shallow, random, completely disconnected from anything that happened before the year 2020. But my guest today is not that kind of Christian. She's a church history professor who knows that the new problems we see on our screens are often just old problems, or even sometimes heresies with a new filter on them. So Dr. Miranda Cruz is a professor at Indiana Wesleyan University and the author of Faithful Politics. She's got a Master's of Divinity from Princeton and studied religious nationalism in her PhD program at Baylor University. So she kind of knows some stuff I don't know, and I want to learn from her. I bet you do too. So now let's get into it. Welcome to the pod, Miranda. How you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, this will be fun. So we'll start with some fun stuff here and hopefully learn along the way. So the internet can be a bit of a wild west for us, and especially now that it's in our pockets at all times and doing whatever we're doing on social media too. It's hard to keep up. But as you've just been observing, this is obviously not your job, but this stuff seeps into the culture. What's the weirdest trend maybe related to Christianity of late that's made you want to maybe pull a church father out of retirement because you're like, this is weird?
But there's so many. Now, I have to admit that I'm not on TikTok. It kind of freaks me out. But part of the reason for that is because I believe that faith can't actually be distilled into tiny, tiny videos. But one trend that I've been paying attention to, that's probably old for some of your listeners by now, is the trad wife thing. And so this has lots of crossover into evangelicalism and also into Mormon culture, where a lot of this is coming from. But this idea that the feminine ideal is to, be home, to be a homemaker, to be a wife and a mother. And I know people who have the spiritual gift of homemaking, right? Who have this deep calling to their homes and to hospitality. And I don't want to belittle that. I think that's a really beautiful thing for women who have that vocation and that gifting. But this trend presents this ideal as if it were traditional, and it's not. At best, it goes back to the late 19th, early 20th century in post-industrial England and America. But, who makes me want to pull out a church father? I'll pull out church fathers and church mothers on this. That the ideal for men and for women has always been godliness and Christ-likeness. And in the early church, being married was looked down on. And I don't think we need to go back to that either. I don't think that's healthy. But the ideal feminine, the ideal woman was someone who was wholly dedicated to God. And if she was also a wife and a mother, then she did that in a way that was reflective of her commitment to God. But this ideal that what a woman has to do with who she is in the home and in relation to a caretaking role to other people. We just don't see that in scripture. And in the early church, where the women we usually know about them because they were influential nuns, or they were serving as deaconesses, or they had these influential roles in the lives of their brothers, like Saint Macrina or Saint Monica. Just these women that we look to are like that. It has no resemblance to this kind of trad wife trend.
Yeah. And I've picked up on the fact, I read an article I, of course, because I tend to be more of a reader than a scroller, I sometimes find out about these trends in like longer thought pieces
Same.
in places, which is totally lame sounding, but that's true. But I read a piece about how some of the more popular tradwife people have been like exposed as really just baiting people into like clicking their links and giving them more money. And others had been exposed for actually having a career or in other cases, not actually being wives of anyone. They were just single women looking for clicks
Yeah.
because it was a trend. So I
Mhm.
find that all super ironic. And so some of the people that were all caught up in it have actually been doing some navel gazing about like, maybe this is all just designed to feast on my insecurities as a man, for instance, which tends to work with all types of people, women too. But that's maybe one that men are fallen for. So another thing I've noticed is people will have like these new revelation or secret way to manifest blessings. Like the secret knowledge, like this is the way. And of course, a lot of it's like marketing jargon applied to spirituality. And we've seen some stuff really take off of really like even predictions of the end times, or a secret new way of interpreting scripture. So does church history have a name for that kind of new but old randomness or secret knowledge type stuff? Where does that come from? And what can we learn from history that helps us interpret this stuff we find online?
Yeah, there's this whole category of things of that sort that are called Gnosticism. And Gnosticism was this whole idea that there was some kind of secret knowledge and it was revealed to specific people. And so the way to be Christian, or there were versions of Gnosticism in other religions too, you had to kind of attach yourself to the right teacher who was getting the right revelation. And this looked like all kinds of different things. So, like St. Augustine was in the Manichaean sect, which is a version of Gnosticism. And they believed in this extreme asceticism and the idea that the body is evil. And so you need to you need to be set free from basic needs like food.
So
And
what
they
do you
have,
mean by, so you said extreme asceticism? What's that?
yeah.
What's
So it was basically,
asceticism?
yeah. So asceticism is the idea of self denial, but it can go to an extreme. So in Gnosticism, this idea that there's secret knowledge, that secret knowledge is like spiritual knowledge. And so to access that spiritual knowledge, you needed to like separate the soul and the body. And so the body was seen as bad. It's just this prison that's keeping your soul from ascending to the next highest level. And so asceticism often is connected to denying the body in order to kind of free the soul to receive this secret knowledge. It's not always that, but with
That's an
Gnosticism,
example of
it
it.
was that. So
Nice.
there's this movement in the early church that was actually called the New Prophecy Movement.
Huh.
Sounds like the
Yeah.
kind of thing we would
We
hear
it's
today.
very old to us, but back then it was
Yeah,
the new
exactly.
okay. Yeah.
Exactly, and the new prophecy was part of this kind of movement, where they're like, "Okay, we have secret knowledge, and you just need to join our group in order to have access to this
Hmm.
secret way of ascending to the next spiritual plane." And they actually went so far as to say new revelations to these, appointed leaders had more authority than the Bible itself. And so there's different versions of that today. Some of them are obviously kind of something other than Christian, but a lot of it is within Christianity and people saying, "Oh, God told me this and revealed to me this what this Bible verse means and how it applies today." And often it has something to do with the numbers, which is funny. Like they'll say, "Okay, well because it's this number of chapter and this number of verse, it has this secret connection to this current event," when the numbers weren't even added until like the
Right.
1500s and
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing, I always tell my students, if someone's claiming to have some kind of secret, they're not from God, because God's not trying to confuse us, or the Bible isn't a secret code that we have to get the key to unlock. Like
Mm,
some things in the Bible or some things from God are confusing, but not because God is trying to confuse us, just because we're limited in our understanding. So we have to be cautious about that kind
great.
of thing for
That's
sure.
great. Great. And there's kind of two sides to that I've experienced. One is just somebody sitting under teaching, like, or watching even a video. It
Yeah.
can be alluring to be like, oh,
Mhm.
this is the way. And I like to nerd out on stuff. And some of that stuff feels a little nerdy, like you can go down a rabbit hole on things. But I need to be skeptical too of how somebody might be using that to make me dependent upon them, right? I don't, because they may be using that, be, well, hey, since I have this special knowledge about stuff, if you don't keep coming back to me, you're not going to really know what you're believing here. And I think some kind of teachers, they're almost enslaving of their audience in that sense, as opposed to empowering. And that's the other side of the coin I've thought about, is like, man, I do love to nerd out on things and say, boy, this is a different way of looking at this, but to hold it loosely and not be like, this is the way to interpret this because of this deeper textual, and empower them with things like, hey, guess what? You can download the Blue Letter Bible app too, and with a few clicks, find the thing I just said, like that, be able to empower people, to be like, look at yourself and get deeper yourself, not just me as the filter, for all this information, as though I'm your guru now.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think one of the ways that that will often look is, and we're primed for this because we have short attention spans on social media. So it'll often look like jumping from one thing to the next and kind of chaining together a bunch of Bible passages and a bunch of current events and saying, there's this,
right.
and
Quick cut.
voila, here's the secret truth.
Yes.
I think an easy way to recognize the error in that is to understand that the Bible isn't just a collection of bullet points. It's actually a
Yeah. Yeah.
single
Yeah.
narrative telling God's story of redemption. And so we're not supposed to pluck out all the pieces and then rearrange them and then somehow connect them to the United States or to Russia or
Yeah.
to Iran or whatever current event as if that's what the Bible was
Absolutely.
talking about.
Yeah, no more brain rot Bible study.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that doesn't
please.
work. Okay. So another one I've noticed is people will do like 60-second deconstruction videos of just like how they're deconstructing, or what, and things that are just really deconstructive oriented. Of course, that word has become really trendy, and a lot of people even kind of market deconstruction. I know I've heard of somebody that's a deconstruction doula, meaning they come alongside people and help them deconstruct. So what does church history have to say to us today when so many people are deconstructing? And that's not just some kind of like a social media trend. People go through their own deconstructions. I did back in the 90s. And in the end, that turned out to be a good thing, even though I felt like I was losing my faith. In the end, I came back even stronger. So but what would be your perspective on that in church history? How can we learn from others throughout history that, maybe this isn't just something from our era?
Mhm. Yeah, I think one challenge is that sometimes learning the history of the church can contribute to people feeling the need to deconstruct,
Mm,
right? Because, I teach church history and a lot of it's dark. A lot of it's kind of bad. We have to learn from mistakes that Christians have made in order to not keep doing that stuff. So that can legitimately raise questions and cause people to question anything from real basic foundational stuff like the Trinity to contemporary evangelicalism. So, as a historian, I acknowledge that history can sometimes contribute to that. But I think one of the powerful things about the Christian faith is that we actually believe that God is working in relationship with us in real time. That God is both above history and can see the whole thing, but is also active within history. And so when we're questioning something, we can have the confidence that God's not surprised by that. God's not freaked out by the things that we're questioning or by the fact that we're questioning. And if we'll let him, God will sit with us in the questioning. And I think part of the challenge of kind of contemporary deconstruction, where I see this most is the evangelical kind of stream of deconstruction. So much of that is people who have thought that they had to have all the right answers or who haven't been allowed to ask questions, in their Christian upbringing or adolescence. And so they have a very rigid wall of things they must believe. And then when a few bricks get removed from that, uh, the whole wall starts to collapse because there's no kind of safe framework for where do I go when I'm questioning this, or there's no framework for thinking through, well, is that brick even necessary to the Christian faith? Like, can I just discard that part and still say, yes, I'm Christian, I have faith in God? And so I think history can help with that because so many people throughout history and in scripture go through these really troubling faith questions and really difficult struggles and experiences of rejection or questioning, where is God? Does God even exist? And so we can actually find companionship there and recognize that God is present in all of this. He's not just hovering above it, waiting to zap us if we ask the wrong question. So it doesn't have to be this just binary choice between I believe all of it exactly as I was taught growing up, or I'm not a Christian at all and I have to get rid of the whole thing. I think history can actually help us reconstruct in a healthy and vibrant
Yeah.
way, and to determine what's okay to deconstruct and get rid of, what can actually help us to be more faithful if we get rid of some of the things we've been holding on to. And history can help us do that so that we don't rebuild a faith that's just built on whatever TikTok influencers are saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel that. And the brick metaphor is, I think, an apt one. We think all of this fits together and, these interlocking mortared patterns, and it can start to crumble. And that's why people hold on to everything as a system, as opposed to saying, okay, well, is that system really actually also interlocked? And then everything tumbles down. I mean, I do think that it can be a real healthy thing to get serious about what are the things I really do believe and that I have a conviction for. I'm always compelled by the story of Thomas, who didn't believe at first, even though all of the other disciples believed. He was firm in his doubting of that. Thus, we call him Doubting Thomas. But I love that he's there with them when Jesus appears to him. So that means not only did he feel like, well, I can still do community, and he did his doubting in community. He did his deconstructing in a way in the community. But they allowed him to be in that community. And I just thought, what was the tension of the few days where he didn't believe and they did believe?
Mhm.
And I want to be that kind of early church community is what that is.
Yeah.
And that for me was inspiring in my journey to rebuild faith. And I hope other people can do that. And it's oftentimes more of a challenge in the people, they don't reveal their deconstruction, to people because they don't want to be challenged, or they don't want to feel the awkwardness of it. But I hope we can be communities of faith and doubt in that respect. The unfortunate thing is sometimes people announce their doubt on social media as like an end. It's an end to the journey. Here I am, and now I'm, like you say, an evangelical is even a title there is really more. It's a against something as opposed to a journey of thinking through something. And social media makes all that worse. I'm kind of glad that I didn't have social media back in the 90s. I didn't have to share what was going on in my brain. People don't have to now either, but they feel somewhat compelled
Mhm.
by the culture to do that.
Yeah. I think we could take a cue from Mary who pondered all these things in her heart.
Mm,
Like be if we're having those questions, we're having doubt, we're even deconstructing, do that with other actual physical people who care about your well-being, and who have your best interest at heart, and ideally who've wrestled with some of those same questions and can guide you through that. You're not going to find that on the internet. And once you've put something out there, it's harder to then progress from that because people are just going to keep dragging you back to what you put out there on the internet.
Yeah, maybe do your doubting in community with people that might buy you coffee, not just look for you to, drive their influencer numbers. Yeah, amen on that. Well, I do want to take one pause and thank one of our sponsors, and that's Global Marketplace Multipliers. So Global Marketplace Multipliers is a place where we're always trying to equip and integrate your faith and your influence in your workplace with this eye toward global disciple making. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a digital nomad, a teacher, a student, or whatever other calling you enter abroad, learn more about what others are doing around the world and how you might be a part of it at gponline.org/GMM. That's for Global Marketplace Multipliers. So Miranda, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you have written on politics and you have an expertise in this. You've studied it. So on social, you have a book called Faithful Politics, which addresses these things. So on social media, politics and faith are like smashed together into a single kind of angry identity where they kind of talk about the shouty issues. I sometimes like, even though people don't use all caps, it feels all caps. So I'm kind of thinking minority majority here. Like, how has in church history, Christians handled being like a political minority? Um, and then there's also the temptation to lose your soul to the empire when you sort of feel like the majority and having power. Like, when has that happened in history? I think some of the church feels a little like we're in the minority in our culture, and other parts of it are like we're winning, and we're influencing, we're controlling. And so how do we grapple with both sides of that majority minority feeling as people of faith when it comes to politics?
Yeah. I think that the idea that who we serve is Jesus and that what that looks like shouldn't necessarily change in its substance regardless of whether we're numerically the minority or the majority. And when we've been the minority, so thinking back to the early church, uh, the minority, as sometimes they were being persecuted, sometimes they were just being left alone, sometimes they were being mocked. It varied wildly. But these early Christians were focused on bearing witness to Jesus Christ being Lord. And that meant that they looked really different. They lived differently than the rest of society. They had different relationships between men and women. They had marriages that were based on choice instead of based on just passing down wealth. They had monogamous marriages instead of marriages where it was widely accepted and common for the husband to have multiple partners on the side of his spouse. So their marriages looked fundamentally different. They cared for children differently. They cared for children at all. They cared for the poor. And these things got attention, and that was actually how the early church grew, was because people were seeing this is a community that lives differently and that the difference in how they live is helping people who have been marginalized and harmed by society. So the poor are treated better, women are treated better, slaves are treated better, and eventually it's Christians who lead abolition. And so I think today the question is the same. Are Christians individually and collectively living in a way that bears witness to the lordship of Jesus Christ by not conforming to what the world tells us to value, which is power, which is money, which is sex, which is influence, which is clicks, whatever it is. If we're known for being a group of people who take care of each other, who take care of others who aren't, among us, for being unusually kind and unusually level-headed in heated debates, uh, for not being just in lockstep with a political party and instead being in lockstep with Christ, then I think that's attractive to people, whether we're the minority or the majority.
Mm, mm.
But we fall into the trap of wanting to be the majority, either because being persecuted isn't fun, and so we would like to not experience that, uh, or because in some cases we believe that if we just gain power, then we'll be able to transform the world into the kingdom of God, and we'll be able to bring about Christ's reign, or we'll be able to get everybody to act like Christians, because isn't that what God wants, is for everybody to behave according to these particular moral values. And so we cling to power, and in doing that, we undermine our own witness, because it's vulnerable people who are harmed by people in power generally.
Yeah. And so how do I, faith is such an important motivator for us, and it should be. And so, I mean, just like I see commercials that tap into other desires of, that tap into a desire just for hunger or thirst. You can have like a commercial for a drink, and it always has the condensation on the outside of the glass, and like, oh, I'm kind of thirsty now. And hunger and sex is used as a big motivator. So these things that are our drive, but religion is that in a way we don't see as obviously, and it can be kind of almost used as marketing or even
Uh-huh.
propaganda. How can I be better at maybe spotting how somebody might be using or even manipulating my faith motivators um for marketing purposes, or even political marketing purposes, or propaganda as some people call it?
Yeah. I think a basic question we can ask is, what do they want me to do? Uh, do they want me to vote? Do they want me to support their legislation? Do they want me to uh, get mad, or get afraid? What are they trying what are they trying to get me to do? Because this is what marketing is for, right? Is to get you to take an action, usually buying something. So you could also ask, what are they trying to get me to buy?
Right.
And if it's not something that makes me more like Jesus, then I don't want what they're selling. Uh, and then we can ask, okay, is this use of religious language? Is the way they're talking about religion? Is that just something that kind of flows naturally from who they are because they're a Christian person and that's just how they talk? And what comes naturally is quoting that Bible verse? Is that natural to them, or is that something they're intentionally, or their speechwriters or whoever are intentionally adding in order to manipulate me? I think we, as Christians, sometimes we're naturally drawn to the familiar language of faith, right? Our ears perk up, like, oh, they quoted the Bible.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have to ask why, because anybody can quote the Bible. Anybody can read it, anybody can quote it, anybody can look up, Google what does the Bible say about X and then throw that Bible verse in there. So I think we need to be really discerning about what are they trying to sell me? And if it's something other than becoming more like Jesus, then we need to really be careful and critical about whether we want to buy whatever it is they're selling, including a policy or a political agenda or something to click or a product or whatever it is.
Yeah, I know. Occasionally we'll see private emails because of investigations released, and by by people in the political world, and I'm always struck with when you see these people talk about faith groups such as my own, they'll talk about it in such a crass way, about it being some group that we can basically lure in with this or that. And they'll talk about issues being a wedge here and there, and how we can, it's all very, Machiavellian,
Yeah.
in how, we know we can be used, and that can be true in any era on any issues. But sometimes we think of faith as being more pure, motives, right? Whereas, that it may be for me, and I may have a real honest conviction about something, but somebody else may be using that too for their own purposes. So, yeah, it's interesting for me to think through. Well, I want to mention our other, sponsor for today's pod, and that's Indiana Wesleyan University, actually, where Miranda is a professor. If you're looking for an education that shapes your character, not just your resume, IWU is a Christ-centered community committed to changing the world, and you can discover their degree programs that develop your scholarship leadership, for a life of impact. I'd encourage you to go to discover.indwes.edu. That's INDWES.edu, and learn about some programs, including Miranda's program. Uh, so I want to scope out a little bit here with you, Miranda, and get your general advice, for anybody listening or watching this. In a world that feels like it's kind of reinventing the wheel all the time, I think a lot of times people think like, oh, we're understanding faith in this way that's like we've got it all together. How does knowing church history help us, with our faith, and ground us in the middle of what can feel like a little bit chaotic in our era? How would you encourage us to say, because I mean, you have students who are getting up to their eyeballs in history and studying this or even majoring in it, and you work with a lot of them. But how about just, I mean, you also would teach people that are just taking a taste of it, or you come across people that just a little bit of understanding the history of the church would be good for them to know in their faith. How can that help us? Obviously, I don't need to convince most Christians that studying the Bible would be a good thing. But what about after the Bible and everything up to today? Why does church history matter?
Yeah, I'll tell you why it matters to me. Uh, it helps to ground me in the fact that I'm part of something much bigger than just me and Jesus. And I think we can get the idea that all Christian faith is me and Jesus and what I believe in my head. And confess with my mouth. But primarily, do I believe the right things? And it's about me and Jesus. And studying church history shows me that I'm actually part of something much bigger, a community that transcends time and space. And on the one hand, that can make me feel very small in a good way. It can keep me humble. like what I am doing has value, but it's not that important. Uh, what I can offer isn't going to derail God's work in the world, but I do get the opportunity to contribute to it in my small ways. So I think that can help us to not overestimate ourselves, and also to not think of things as too dire, like everything's hinging on me somehow. And I think also when I look at church history, especially the Western world, like where the majority of people have been Christian for much of the history of the last 2,000 years, because yeah, there's some really dark parts of church history. The Inquisition and Crusades and defending slavery, and there's some terrible stuff in there. But also everything good, maybe not every single thing, but everything I can think of, every
Yeah,
positive
yeah,
development has been the result of Christians who were inspired by their faith and for looking for active, practical ways to do something, almost always to do something that would make life better for other people. And so the movements, the individuals who we've seen make the world a better place have been people who were doing that because it's what they believed God was calling them to do. And yes, the church has failed in certain areas, and yes, people who are Christian have done terrible things, but the world has gotten better because of Christians being faithful to their call. And so I think that prompts me to always be asking the question, what does it look like for me to be faithful to the next thing that God is calling me to do? And I have a very small, simple life. I'm not, out here, getting famous or getting clicks, and I have, a few hundred friends on Facebook. I'm not influential in any massive meaningful way, but I'm part of that stream of history of people who are just trying to be faithful, where God has placed us, and I'm in good company in the church, and I'm surrounded by a cloud of witnesses as I do that. And so I love church history because of that, because it's the stream that I'm part of, and I just get to have my small, valuable, but not really all that important contribution to make.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely don't have that main character energy that I think a lot of us tend to drift to in the social media world in particular. It's kind of like, because we almost all become our own like publicist or something. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying there. What I was thinking when you were sharing about all of the things Christianity has contributed in the world, and how church history reflects on that. I was recalling AJ Thomas, who's a pastor friend of mine up in Canada. He shared this old timer story that I had heard a long time ago, but I hadn't thought of it in a long time, about, in a way, that dynamic you're mentioning is a little like the two fish that are at a crossroads in the ocean who come across an old fish, and the old fish says, "How's the water treating you?" And the two young fish look at each other, and one of them says, "What's water?" The idea being, of course, that the fish are in the water. They don't know what water is because they're just in it. It's everything around them. And sometimes we're that way with many of the things, maybe all of them, that Christianity has done in the world and have contributed to the world that we just take for granted. So yeah, that reveals a lot. So before we go, Miranda, I'd love to hear from you. You've written in a way that I think, ironically, you're a church historian, but you really examine a lot of things that are pretty current and are current challenges. And so I think you have this strange mishmash where you have this, deeply rooted historical view of things, but then you're also like, the things that are happening right now in our world today seem relevant to the kind of things you write about and teach about and instruct about. So what hope would you give us as Christians living in the world we're living in, for how we can engage things today in a way that can bring hope to other people as well?
Hmm. One of the things I love in history is identifying those points where it could have gone differently. So I think of the Reformation, that could have gone differently. I think of um, African American Christians being asked to leave St. George Chapel in Philadelphia in the 1700s, and that being really the start of Sunday morning being the most segregated hour. That could have gone differently. People made decisions that set things in motion. But what that means is that a trajectory is just a trajectory until someone changes it. And so that gives me hope that we're not kind of fated toward this, like an inevitable descent into such deep polarization that we can't communicate with each other, or something like that. It can feel like that we're just on this trajectory toward chaos and division, and we're just on this freight train and we can't get off. But each one of us individually has the opportunity to pull whatever tiny brake we have and say, I can get off that train. I don't have to contribute to the polarization and the chaos. And my name's not going to be in a history book saying, here's the great thing she did that changed the trajectory of the world, but I might be part of somebody's testimony. Or I might be part of the story of a small organization or a small school that says, we were headed in one direction, and this person or this group of people had the wisdom and the courage to say, let's stop going this direction and let's try something else. Let's try to do something better. Let's try to do something that's more true to who Christ is. And every one of us has the opportunity to do that. We're not stuck in some kind of fatal doom loop. We can recognize when we're making things worse, and we can choose to do something differently. And history shows us where people made that choice faithfully and where people failed to make that choice and the consequences of it. And so that's just what I'm trying to do every day. And that's why I talk about politics, because that's an area where there's a lot of apparent doom and chaos. We say, okay, but we can do something different. It doesn't have to be this way. So what can I do to help in my small little corner of the world and of the internet?
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. And it can feel a little discouraging and cynical and hopeless. And so
Right.
I'm glad to hear you provide some hope for that and what we can do in our small way in our corner. That's what it takes. Well, I'm grateful to have you on the pod today, Dr. Miranda Cruz. Everyone should check out her book, Faithful Politics, and find more of her work at mirandazaporcruz.com. That's Miranda, ZAPORCRUZ.com. And to you, our listeners or viewers over at YouTube and Substack, thanks for tuning in to Not That Kind of Christian. If you like today's episode, share it with a friend, give a review, get it out there in the ether in all the ways you want. You can even do a TikTok if you want to share it. Get it out there, and then we can go a little bit deeper in the conversation. You can also check out more info in the show notes and find my writings, as always, over at daviddrury.substack.com. Big thanks to Seth Strand, our producer, who makes this podcast possible, and to our executive producer, Jamil Acevedo, the executive vice president of Wesley Seminary. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.